Thank you so much.
Sure. All right, so when I say we, I mean we are the Inclusive Design Research Center at OCAD University in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. So we are the largest research group at OCAD University, which is formerly the Ontario College of Art and Design. It's the largest art and design school in Canada, and oldest too. And we have been doing this work for close to 30 years. We were with the University of Toronto originally, and for many, many of those years, the last little more than a decade, we've been at OCAD. So we've been doing work in the space of making technology more equitable. And the focus originally was on accessibility and making technology in the web adaptive for people with disabilities and for their adaptive technologies. And we've expanded that and grown, and kind of the trajectory of the group has changed as those sorts of things have been understood in a much more intersectional way. So we work in all areas of equity. Within education, we recognize that it's not just barriers to access that are born of disability. In fact, we use the United Nations definition of disability, which we've contributed to as well, which is that it's a mismatch between the individual and what they're trying to do and the tools that are available to them at the time. So that's where technology comes in and can enable people. So we take the social model, it's called, of disability. It is not an ability or a lack of ability of an individual or a medical cause. It's something that's socially constructed, and especially in education. So the intersectional view of that is access barriers to education have included much more than that. So we think not just about accessibility, we think about who has unlimited bandwidth, what communities have computers or digital devices, what kinds of digital devices do they have, what other ways can they access the materials. And so it's really inclusion for everyone. And we're quite ambitious and quite unapologetic in trying to take on the very hard, gnarly things. I recognize a few of you. Okay, hi Jonathan, hi Tanya. So why don't I jump in and show you some things. I will say this, I do well with interruptions, so please feel free to interrupt me at any moment. I'm going to share my screen, and any of the URLs that I run into, I'm going to share with you as well. Okay, I am going to just share.
Okay, that's good.
So please interrupt me if you have any questions. This is the website for the Inclusive Design Research Center. That is the center that is my home space. This is the website for the FLOE project, floeproject.org. And FLOE, we loosely had associated with flexible learning in open education. So it starts from a premise of open education resources. And when we use open education resources, a lot of cool magic can happen. So you see on the top of the screen, this is one of the tools that we've built. It's called Learner Preferences, or User Interface Preferences, it has a couple of names. And it is this magic drop down that allows you to transform content on the fly, auto-magically. So how do we accomplish this? What we do is we start by authoring content in an accessible way. So there are ways that are best practices using open policies and open standards to make accessible content on the web. HTML, CSS, HTML5, CSS, JavaScript allow us to do those things in a sensible way. And then we can strip the semantic meaning of the content, the semantics, the sort of structure of it. If you think of semantics as the scaffolding, like what's an H1, what's an H2, what's a table, that's the semantics. So then we can transform it on the fly, and it's woo, amazing. So I will show you another demo of this where it's going to be much clearer. The point of this is we aren't interested in making a one-size-fits-all. That's not going to work. What we want to do is empower the learner or the educator, whomever. We want to empower the user to say, this is what works for me. Give me this format. And because we're in the digital realm, we have a lot of flexibility to be able to do that. That's one of the tools that the Flow project has worked on. I'm going to show another one to you. It's called the Inclusive Learning Design Handbook. If nothing else, we are a handbook making peoples at the IDRC. So this handbook is for people who are content creators, especially in education, but anybody who creates any content at all. And this gets in some of the gnarly stuff about how to make it inclusive or accessible. It takes on some of the high level, we call these perspectives, where you're talking about accessibility versus inclusivity. What's the difference? How do they overlap? We talk about achieving inclusion in education. Our director, Yuta Treviranus, has written a number of pieces about inclusive design. There are 3 dimensions of inclusive design that she goes over here in these articles. A number of us are publishing things that are relevant to education and open education and inclusion and accessibility. These are some of the practices. So we go into things like co-creation, some of the best practices for things to keep in mind when you're creating content, accessibility principles, understanding learner needs and preferences. Again, trying to do that one size fits one. Considering cognitive needs, because this is a very tough one. A lot of people stumble on. It's a very complex space. So if you consider, for example, we often talk about the 4 buckets in disability, things people can't do. They can't see, they have cognitive impairments, they can't hear, and they have mobility impairments. There's actually more variation in any of those 4 buckets than there is outside of the buckets. Let's take vision, for example. There's profoundly blind, like total blindness. There's blind from birth. There's blind acquired blindness. There's loss of peripheral vision. There's lots of center vision. So there are all of these variations and all this diversity within that understanding of well, it's the medical model, but so cognitive is a really interesting category. So consider this, the 2-pager, who benefits from a condensed version? Now it's the 1-pager, it's not even 2. CEOs and also people with cognitive impairments. So arguably people with cognitive impairments have a lot in common with people who are quite busy, have distracted attention. So we start to see these cross-cutting places where, and this is where inclusive design comes in, you solve for one group of people who have an extreme need and you wind up serving many people. Who among us wouldn't appreciate a 1-page summary of many things? So this goes into some of those approaches, and then we've got a techniques section where it goes into some of the authoring. So how to create inclusive EPUB 3, inclusive authoring environments, which wouldn't it be nice if there was just one we could all count on and then we could call it a day. There are some that are better than others. There are tips and tricks for how to do accessible content creation. And if that's something you're interested in, we can go into that a little bit, but I just want to do an overview first and then we'll dive in. Oh, I went through that already. We are a handbook making peoples. We have created the Inclusive Design Guide, which can be downloaded and printed into these double-sided cards. They're a lot of fun to have tactile, but you can also interact with them online. So insights, for example, disability is a mismatch. This is the card that will show you what disability as mismatch means. And that is that social model of disability. I'm going to do this. You see what I did? I made the card very small. You see what happened when I did that? This is one of the principles of inclusive design and development. This is graceful degradation. and progressive improvement. So if I'm on a mobile, I should be able to read this very simply. It took away some of the navigation and I can still get all the content. And it actually looks like a nice format. If I expand it, look what happens. I get my tabs back, right? That shows you how, depending on your device, we aren't assuming which device you're using. Come as you are, come from wherever you are, you can use this material. So that's disabilities and mismatch is one of the insights. Some of the practices are how we do this work. So how we design for uncertainty, how we practice co-design, which is a big good topic to chew on. If some of you are interested in that, we can talk about that. How to work openly. When we get into some of the tools, we see some of the tools that you may be familiar with from the design world. We take a slight interpretation on them from an inclusive design perspective. So wireframes, personas, use cases, prototyping, mind maps, all of those things that, you know, you think of your chest of tools and you pull out whatever tool is useful and relevant at that moment, but it depends on the context. So inclusive design is all about the context. And then I'll just show you the activities, some of those that I quite like. The virtuous tornado, I don't know. I grew up in Missouri. Shout out to the Missouri people here. We didn't think of tornadoes as virtuous. They were scary. But the virtuous tornado is our model of how to progressively and iteratively come to solutions. This is what it looks like here. And the idea is that instead of some linear path and some notion of completion, you're doing something more like reflecting and iterating, building on small successes and expanding those and doing it from a kind of a crystallization perspective, letting light come in from wherever it comes in. In other words, great ideas come from anywhere. So that's one of the activities that's in there. The other one I quite like is the toddler grandparent conversation. I have a toddler, so this could be called the toddler parent conversation as well. It is the child who continues to ask why. And what's maddening about it is that it forces you into some very fundamental principles. So if you don't know the answers to it, you either have to go to Wikipedia to figure out how the Milky Way got created, or you have to know your stuff and you have to be able to answer why. We aren't there yet to asking about the Milky Way, but just an example. We've created another toolkit, guide thingy, handbook that is about co-design within communities, community-led co-design. There are a couple of other resources we've created around co-design and facilitation as well. I'll show you those in a second. We've been doing a lot of work with cooperatives. So the notion of cutting out the middleman and letting people self-organize and keeping capital where it is between one transactor and another, rather than a third party getting involved in skimming. So that's where a lot of the co-design work there came from. We have something called Snow, which is an open education site. It's largely for K through 12, and we've got materials, formats, articles, resources, a lot of things to help educators understand how to make education inclusive for that particular age group. Let me put that URL in here. And I mentioned our JavaScript library. So that's called Fluid Infusion. Flow project is part of the Fluid project's umbrella. Don't get confused by all these words. Infusion is our framework. So the idea is we can infuse these accessible features into applications and into websites. So this is an open education resource from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the NOAA, and it's about climate change. So you saw this before, but I'll just show you a few things here because you can sort of see it better on this screen. I can increase line spacing for readability. I can change the default, the default font. There's the Open Dyslexic font. The contrast, this is for people with vision needs, but also if you're out, you just decided you're sick of winter and you're out in the park and there's glare on your screen, you could take advantage of this as well. Table of contents. Stop and think for a moment. Why a table of contents? Because if you are not a visual user, you don't get the at a glance view of what's on this page. You don't get the form and the structure. If you get an option for a table of contents, that gives you the form of the page and it allows you to jump to spots. So I could jump down to features if that's where I wanted to get. And I can see roughly structurally what's going on in the page. For instance, if you're like me and you go to Wikipedia and you're interested in learning about somebody, I always go to their personal life. You can jump to their personal life. Tells you a lot about people. Enhance the inputs. So you can see those things that are clickable are going to get much bigger here. So you can see them and maybe have an easier target for them if you have a mobility impairment. Letter spacing or kerning, you can see that changing here, again, for readability. All of this is done because it's an open education resource and it's semantically tagged properly. Word spacing can be changed. We can turn on syllables, which gives us indicators of syllables in the words. I like this feature, and this is one that we've experimented with. It's called Simplify. And what it does is a number of things. Let me just press it so you can see what happens here. I'm going to do that again. I'm going to press Simplify. So what it did is it took away everything that wasn't body text for those of you who are interested in the semantics. So it took away the background image. It took away the navigation. There are some browsers or readers that have some features like this, like Safari has had a reader option for this. So that is something that you can do. There's also a text-to-speech engine in Chrome that you can activate by turning on text-to-speech. I'm going to turn that off because it'll start to speak the page to me. But this is a show of just what you can do here. Now, I will say that this is out there in the wild. I'll even do this on the fly. Let me see if I can. Sarah Hendren, a colleague who's amazing in the world of design, has a blog. There it is. Look at that. I did a demo and I didn't break it. And it was on the fly. So Sarah uses WordPress and has incorporated this into her WordPress theme. You can use this on WordPress sites quite easily. So if those of you who are out there wondering, how do I get this in my page? You can do this within WordPress. One last thing I want to tell you about, because it's brand new and I'm feeling very excited about it lately. It just came out last week. This was one of the eCampus Ontario funded projects from the virtual learning strategy round of funding they just went through. A whole bunch of press books got created. This is one that I worked on with a pretty amazing group of people. It's called Learning to be Human Together. And you might think, wait a minute, I didn't know we had to learn to be human. I thought we just were. This is around humanizing education. So if you go down into the content of this, what you'll see is some modules that we did some co-designs with around unlearning and unsettling, so questioning and reflecting, students as agents of their own diverse destiny, creating an inclusive community of learners, sustaining change, critiquing care. And then we've got little gems in here like an inclusive facilitation guide. So how do you do this stuff from another perspective? You might say, whoa, that's a lot of stuff that's coming out of one project. These are many projects with one ethos, and that is, how do we make education accessible, high quality, and available to everyone? It's SDG number 4. I didn't say it the way the UN said it, but it's the same ethos. How do we break down barriers so that learners can learn the way that works best for them? People can consume content the way that works best for them. And not just from an ed tech perspective or from a technology perspective, but also from a conceptual perspective. What are the things we need to rethink about education? What are the things we need to rethink about pedagogy and about the ways that we do things, that we can learn from some of these activities, some of these tools, and some of the ways that we do things? I will, I think, pause there because that seemed like a lot. And then I think there's stuff in there.
Thanks, Jess. We have a couple questions in the chat. First from Tanya, how did you decide to include these features? Are they, quote, things inclusive designers know, or did you ask for community input, create a wish list, some other process?
What a great question. The answer is yes. We did all those things. So inclusive designers don't know things, just secret things that other people don't know. What we do is we spend time with people who are on the edges, the people who are extreme or edge cases in education, people for whom access is broken, and we involve those people in the work that we're doing. So in disability studies, you'll recall there's the phrase nothing for us or nothing about us without us. And we take that quite seriously. Being open, both in terms of the community, open source, open access, open license, everything is transparent. It's all out there. We have probably over close to a decade of work that's gone into some early thinking about this and some iterations of this and some changes. So we have made gobs of lists with communities. We've made wish lists with communities. We've worked with folks like Pressbooks and Rebus. We've worked with OER Commons. Our authoring, our metadata tool is actually in OER Commons. Now you're gonna see another demo. Am I gonna break it? Let me see if I can sign it. Don't look at my password. Oh, I got nervous and pressed the wrong thing. Oh, don't look at all my passwords. Okay. This is a nightmare. Okay, there I am. So we will do add an OER, create a resource using open author. Okay. Oh boy. I don't even know what that screenshot is. That seems dangerous. Okay, hold on a second. You can't see all of this, can you?
No, it's like paused for us.
That's excellent. Okay, that is. Oh, heck, I'll use that one. Okay. I found this image, Athleta, I think it's called Athleta. They're a clothing company, workout company. They posted this and I thought it was really interesting. And I use this now in some of my training, my students. So I asked them, what do you see in this picture? So maybe you all can reflect on that privately for a moment. And then we'll go into, where is it? That's not it. Haven't been in here in a while. Anyway, the metadata, the metadata feature in here and some of the accessibility features in here are from the work that we did. I can't find it. One demo broke, not bad, not bad. From the work we did with OER Commons. So what was my point? Oh, back to your question. We worked with OER Commons because one of the things that was of interest was labeling things with metadata labels within repositories for OER content. We've also worked with Benetech to get the access for all metadata standard into, shoot, I forgot the name of it, the one that Google and all the browsers use. Anyway, the metadata is there. So if you do a search, you can find some accessible media and accessible content. So we continue to ask, Tanya, and we continue to wonder what's going to be useful. We get feedback from people and we work with others in the field of technology, of digital, of accessibility, of inclusion, of interaction design, of resource design, all kinds of folks to get some of the ideas for what goes into this. Some of this, this tool's been around for years now, maybe 5 years. And what's exciting is how many people have been influenced by it. So a number of companies have literally taken some of our code and incorporated it into their own tools. That's what we want. We are a public resource. We do not make this so that we can build a silver bullet and then, you know, retire on it. We want to make this available to everyone and anyone because we want this to be in all of your apps, in all of WordPress. So we'll work on any level to make sure that this stuff gets integrated and stays open. So all of our code, all of our research, all of our conversations, everything that we do is exhaustingly shared publicly. I hope I answered your question.
You brought tears to my eyes with your last bit about being open, because that's so inspiring.
Aww.
Thank you.
It's lovely to see you, Tanya. I hope you're doing well. I don't know Beeline. I don't know Beeline Reader, Brian. So I don't have thoughts on it, unfortunately. Tell me about it.
Yeah, so I'm familiar. LibreText has an overlay of Beeline Reader. My understanding is it's a Stanford University project, and it has some of sort of the contrast and just different sorts of things that this program that you're overlaying. Some of the cool features you showed, you know what I mean? It does some of the similar sorts of things from an accessibility standpoint and things. And so I thought it was fantastic what you showed. I just saw some similarities. I was like, oh, this is like another, you know, sort of option. I just didn't know the differences, you know what I mean, between the different products. So
yeah, so there are lots of them out there now. Like I said, we are fond of anybody who copycats us. We think it's a great sign. What is it? Imitation is the greatest form of flattery. So we're happy that there are things out there that look just like what we're doing or have very similar features. And we encourage people to use them whenever they're out there. So it's awesome that you're familiar with this, Brian, and that you see the utility of it. And I think that the more people that are using these kinds of features, the more we'll see mainstream adoption of them. So I'll give you an example. Closed captions, most of the uses from a study in the UK showed that the people who were using closed captions were not deaf or hard of hearing. They were in bars or restaurants, they were in gyms, or they were sleeping next to their partner who had fallen asleep and they still wanted to binge watch Game of Thrones or something. So they're what we call in inclusive design these curb cut effects. So they are the things that have been legislated or encouraged or have been designed from the edge cases. In this case, the edge cases, scare quotes, being people with disabilities, but they're things we all take advantage of and benefit from. So if anybody uses text messaging, that's an example that was created for the deaf, the deaf or hard of hearing. The telecommunications companies needed a way to get in touch with their users if there was an emergency. Email, Vince Cerf created email to communicate with his wife. They're both deaf. Let's see, there's lots of these. The electric toothbrush, I'm very fond of it. I think it creates excellent dental hygiene, created for people in rehabilitation, contexts with mobility impairments, and on and on and on and on. We have a lot of great examples in the world of when you look at the edges or edge users, we call them, to solve, then you solve for many. Rather than the 80-20, we say you need to flip that and look at the 20. And then the 80 solves for itself. Let's see. Materials communicating, promoting these resources I could share with others. Liliana, that's a good question. Materials communicating and promoting these resources.
So that could be like flyers or, I mean, I have a newsletter that I can, that I'll be sharing all these resources, but instead of me kind of writing what they're about, I don't know if there's been like a communications plan or something that's been developed to promote all these wonderful things that have been developed that have kind of exactly what you would want shared out to describe these resources.
That's a great question. We are soft funded. So no, we don't have a communications person. We don't really promote things other than the typical channels. So we've got websites, we've got LinkedIn, we've got Twitter. Some of us publish on Medium. I would start from our main site here. And then I would invite you to email me and I can drum some things up. We spend more of our time writing grants than we do writing promotional materials, but there's some overlap there. So we could get you some things that describe this. The website for Flow also just went through a redesign. So the wording up there should be actually quite good. You're welcome to copy and paste it. And it's all CC BY. Everything we do is CC BY, which is the Creative Commons attribution license. So please take it and let me know. And I'll be happy to help however I can. I don't know what the compacts are, but that sounds pretty cool.
The compacts, Jess, are the 4 regional higher ed compacts. Tanya works for one, and Liliana does. Annika and I do, and Annika is a consultant with us. I don't know if we have any other, do we have any other compact people on the call today? We're happy to do this. This is just why we have our little collaboration. So.
Oh, that would be amazing. Yeah, we'd love to hear feedback. You know, back to Tanya's point, if you want to get involved, if you want to be part of the conversations, we would love to invite you into open community. And maybe I'll say a word about design. Is that okay?
Please, yeah.
Yeah, because we call ourselves the Inclusive Design Research Center. So presumably we do inclusion, design, research, and we're a center. So the research we do, we don't study people. Well, I study the ethics of all of this, who has access and why, and historically what's been the cause of somebody having access or not having access to education. And from the design perspective, what we found, and we started at the University of Toronto in the library, then we were at Central IT, then we went to the faculty, which is the department in Canada, the Department of Information, which was the library school rebranding itself. So we are a misfit in a good way. And I say that because inclusive design is the horizontal through which every vertical benefits. So regardless of your department, regardless of your role, regardless of your industry, quite frankly, there's something in inclusive design that can help you do more, reach more, do better. There are business cases for it. So the design portion of this is that we realize the way that we do things has a really big impact on the way that they manifest. So if you have 3 guys in a basement building a web browser, search engine, that manifests in a particular way. If you have a community of people that's a very diverse community of people working together, that manifests differently. So there's a great Scientific American article, why diversity makes us smarter. And part of the reason is we all bring in different experiences, different histories, different perspectives. And so we aren't a monoculture of thought. It makes it harder for us to work together because we might trip over some words. We might need to take extra time to make sure we say something in a way that isn't offensive, which arguably I would say is a good thing that maybe Twitter could benefit from. But I think that the point is that you work slower in some ways, but much more intentionally, and it's much more focused on a humanized approach when you bring a group of diverse people together, rather than saying these 3 brilliant jerks in the corner are going to make the decision about ed tech. So our approach has been a community-driven one, and that is reflecting what the field of design has really done over the last number of years. Liz Saunders in Ohio, University of Ohio, I believe, has done a lot of research in how design used to be very much like what anthropology and sociology was doing. There's a lot of magnifying glasses watching people. There was a lot of othering. There was the researcher's gaze, looking outward towards somebody else that they were studying. And then what design did is what a lot of these fields wound up doing as well, is reflecting inward and seeing that if we bring the users, or the so-called users, together with the researchers, together with the designers, all 3 of those together make a better design than an individual trying to interpret somebody else's behavior or trying to speculate about. Speculation is fun, but it's always better to let people be themselves and to give them agency to manifest how they want to make decisions that they're making. especially in education. This starts us down a path of not just open education resources, but things like open pedagogy, open assessment, because it's not just about what you student can do to serve me instructor so that I can then in this very transactional way give you student grade. It's much more about learning and much more about learning outcomes and the benefits of co-created co-learning spaces. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
All right, Jonathan has a question for you, Jess.
Oh, Jonathan, spot on. Yes, I was saying to the WordPress people who may be intimidated by the JavaScript, absolutely. You can download it very easily, integrate it into your websites, put it everywhere. You betcha.
Sounds like Jonathan's gonna be busy.
That's cool.
Super. Other questions for Jess?
This is Brian again. Where is the code? I'm not comfortable with code, but if I was going to point somebody to it, you know what I mean? Where exactly do I point them to?
I will give you the exact pointy place. If you start here, Brian, you can do the download Infusion. And last I looked, oh yeah, it goes straight to the GitHub repository. And not only are we a handbook making peoples, we are a documentation making peoples. So you will find loads of documentation for your code happy folks. And hopefully it'll lead you down a very easy path of integration. I realize I only showed you one of the, there are a lot of other demos there if you want a show and tell. Anybody want a show and tell, or do you want chat?
I want to show and tell.
More show and tell. Okay. I hear ya. Here we go. Okay. So the project started early with individual components, we called them, and this was going on though close to 10 years ago. Oh, I'm going to show you there under. Let me see here. Okay, so this one was born of the following: click and drag, something we make assumptions about all the time. Click and drag assumes what? It assumes you can use a mouse and you can use your hand as the driver of your mouse. So what we did is we created something that was not click and drag, but reordering. So we changed the name, which we thought was quite important because click and drag had become such popular vernacular for just making this assumption. And this assumption was one that was excluding some people. So this is a mouse and a mouse free. I'm just using my keyboard now. This is a mouse free. So it's proving to me I'm not so good with my keyboard. You can shift focus, so you can see the focus is moving across the fruits. And you should be able, let's see, arrow keys to move space or return or enter to open it. Okay. There's the apple, pomegranate. Click an image to focus and to open it in the viewer. There's also a reorder. I don't know why that's, oh, that's just a keyboard accessibility plugin. My apologies. The reorder is down here. More fruits, keyboard controlled. So there, I've got my dragon fruit. You can see by the change in the indication. This is also an accessibility indicator. So you've got a change in the color, but also a change in the border, because if you can't see the color differential, okay, now I've got to press control. There, I press control and it turns orange. You see that? That's again an indicator and a state change. And then I'm pressing K to move to the right. So I just moved without my mouse. That's the reorder. Then we've got the user interface options demo is very similar to the one I showed you, but this is an earlier, oh, it's actually the same one. It was an earlier version of the demo. Inline edit. So this is tabbing to here and then click or press enter to enter in a title. Tab when I'm finished. I can now go, oops, I can go back to it and I can edit it. No, I'm just using my keyboard, no mouse here. And again, a lot of these things we came up with over a decade ago, and many of them have been incorporated into browsers since then. We sit on committees within W3C, WCAG, Access for All, ISO 24751, which is the Access for All ISO standard. So we sit on Accessibility for Ontarians and Disabilities Act. We're helping to write the Accessible Canada Act. We've worked on 508 in the US, et cetera. So we're soup to nuts all the way from policy to practice. This is a page reorder, so you could jump to the pages here. So I just switched to page 8 with my keyboard only. Uploader that allows you to upload with just key commands, and yeah, you know how an uploader works. Many of these things are incorporated now into your browser. Yeah. There's also a secret place, not Build-A-Bear, but Build. This is all of our demos on our build server. So your mileage may vary because the build server gets updated every night. But if you want to go in there and see, for example, we did something called chart authoring. So again, at a glance, you can see the blue has won. They got the most here. If you're a visual user, you can see that. If you're not a visual user, how would you put that into personify that?
Apple.
So the slow beeps are 10s.
BlackBerry.
Fast beeps are 1s.
Microsoft. Other.
I don't know if you heard that. I didn't share with my audio, but
Yeah.
yeah, the idea was to sonify something. And again, at a glance, how do you get that perspective or that picture? We've worked with the folks at University of Colorado Boulder on the FET simulations. So we've been doing some really cool stuff with them. They had a simulation called John Travolta, and it was one of the first ones we worked on with them. You know what's horrifying is that students now don't know who John Travolta is, so they don't get the joke.
Sad.
Sad news. But John Travolta has, like many of their simulations, they're meant to encourage exploration and discovery in physics principles, which we know, like discovering how a physics principle works versus reading about it has such an impact on learning and retention. So they came to us and they said, look, we want to make these accessible. They're in Java now, but we know that we don't want to do the equivalent. So in accessibility, what you'll find is, here's the one that everybody in the 80% is supposed to use, and here's this crappy one that people in the 20% are supposed to use. They didn't want to do that, God bless them. So they said, look, we want to redesign this with you. And we sat down and literally had to redesign some of these simulations so that we would be able to capture that exploration and discovery for a non-visual user, somebody who's just using the keyboard and is just getting cues from a screen reader. And that was a really rewarding project. There's a video player here. We built an HTML5 with an interactive transcript and the ability to do French and English. So we can jump. Oop. Oh, I jumped too far. I'm sorry. This is not going well. It's just a lot of
Really
guitar.
reduce their activities. Let's take a look at bears, for example.
Bears.
Female polar bears give birth while they're.
So that's, again, you can embed it into anything. It's using HTML5. Of course, this does not automatically generate the captions or the transcripts. You would create those. There are ways to automatically generate those now. Sometimes they result in funny things because they don't get it right, but sometimes they get it right, and that's nice.
So Jess, over the course of our working group in the last year, we've had presentations from offering tools like Pressbooks and libretext. We met with FET and saw their simulations. We've done things with H5P and annotation tools. So it sounds like a lot of these things that your center has been working on, you're also sort of getting into the hands of these folks that are making these kinds of products. That's really great.
Yeah, we've definitely worked with pretty much all of those folks in some capacity or another. We're not building the things that they're doing, but they will often reach out to us and say, hey, like with annotation, it's a tricky one for accessibility because it creates all kinds of potential problems. There are also opportunities wherever there are problems. So whenever you're generating something that's text, you could also use that as another format. And so some of it is just at this point supporting people who already know that they want to do these things within their own applications. And sometimes it's giving them some of the tools to do that.
Super, thanks. Does anyone else have any other questions for Jess?
Here's John Travolta. Any questions? I love questions.
Jonathan has a question for you.
Okay.
So you sort of answered this a little bit, Jess, in what you were just describing about your work with the FET people in Colorado. I'm just wondering, kind of a structural question about this whole sort of interest group here. You know, suppose someone I'm working with in the OER space, like has the passion to do this. You know, it gets tears in their eyes, like Tanya did about the things that you're saying, and has a particular focus of I'm aware that this thing I'm working on is not accessible, is not appropriately built to reach all people who want to learn. Would you recommend that they reach directly out to you? You seem to have done joint projects with people, or would you then say, oh no, someone's done it already, and give us a suggestion? How should someone proceed when they perceive needs that they don't feel are being met at the moment?
Oh, it's a great question. Yeah, reach out to us for sure. And if we can help, we will. If we can't, we would likely know somebody who may be able to. One of the things I think that's greatest about being part of an open community is that we're part of a worldwide community of practitioners who are doing some really extraordinary stuff. So we may not be the ones who are doing math jacks, but you know, if you're really worried about accessible math, we can get you in touch with some very smart people. We do some consulting, and we have to pick and choose because it would take over everything we do. But we do some small projects. We've done, just an example, we've done some with the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. We'll often pair it with a project that's focused in a particular area. So Flow has been really focused on education. We've been stretching that to the precariously educated, precariously housed, precariously fed, precarious. Whenever something sort of connects with something we're doing, it's easier for us to spend time on it, but absolutely send it to us. Yeah, I hope you do.
Thank you, Jess. That's great. That's a wonderful invitation. Yeah, and I think as we're all, a lot of the folks that are here with us are sort of our OER advocates. So they're folks that are helping the helpers, you know, may not directly be doing things in OER and technology themselves necessarily, but who become sort of the advisor and the helper and the advocate to those that are. And trying to make those connections for those folks and let them know what's out there in the space and how it can be useful. So I think this has been tremendously useful for you to share this work with us today.
In full disclosure, I don't do this work. In full disclosure, I don't do so much of the technology and the things anymore. And so you as OER advocates, I want to put a bug in your ear about open pedagogy, because I think that open education resources is like a gateway drug, and I do want you to go further on your drug journey, because I think that open education resources gives us opportunities to fundamentally disrupt what has been inequitable within education, and that is everything from the way that we structure education physically, architecturally, interactionally, experientially. I have strong feelings about that, and I would love to talk anybody's ear off about that as well. We have an amazing group of very talented developers and designers that I do work with that do this work, but I have been spending more of my time on that sort of things like that humanizing learning project, and how to help people do the things that they're talking about doing within DEI and all of that stuff, but not just saying it, doing it. So that's kind of the community that I wind up spending time in now.
Yeah, awesome. I think that's a community we all want to be spending time in right now. We're just not really sure how to get there. So this is one great map. Great. Well, if no one else has any other questions, I think we'll probably close our session today. Thank you so much. This has been, I think it's been eye-opening for me. I think everyone else has really enjoyed this as well, and getting a lot of kudos in the chat. Jenny, did you want to say anything before we sign off?
No, just this was another great session. Annika, this is Annika's brainchild to have all of these sessions, and they just keep getting better and better. And Jess, this was one of the very best. And I know that all of us at the Compacts will be reaching out to see how we can really elevate and support and showcase your work and help get more of this work out there.
We'd love to help the Compacts.
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. So thank you everyone for joining us today. I know we had two back-to-back, but we're gonna take a little break. Our next session together will be at the end of April, April 28th. We will be, is that the right date? April, yes, 28th at 4 Eastern, 3 Central. We will be having our next session will be on the topic of OER courseware, and we'll be hearing from some folks that are combining the worlds of OER and adaptive courseware to do cool pedagogical things. So we look forward to seeing you all then. One more thank you to Jess. We'll send out probably tomorrow a copy of the recording for everyone. As Jess said, you're welcome to get in touch with her and let her know what's going on and what you need.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.